Hello, friends. Welcome to the Case for Life program. We're delighted to have you today. And today I have a very special guest to talk about an important figure in the debate over abortion that Christians need to be aware of. We'll get to that in just a minute. But before we launch into that, I want to remind everybody that one of our primary sponsors is Summit Ministries. Summit Ministries does better than anyone I know at equipping students to prepare for life in the real world when it comes to ideas. Our students are subjected to all kinds of things our churches are not preparing them to face. And we want to make sure Christian students have a biblical worldview, and Summit does a fantastic job at that. You can get information on that on our sites, and I hope you will. All right, today I have a wonderful guest with me. In fact, one of my favorite people in the whole universe, Megan Almon. She is a speaker with Stand to Reason. Now, some of you may go, wait a minute, I recognize that name, Megan Almon. Well, you should, because she worked with us at LTI for, what was it, 15 or 16 years, Megan? I can't remember.
It was right smack in the middle of that, about 15 and a half.
Well, there we go. So I'm going to defer to the younger mind there to get the accuracy in, but I'm delighted to have her on the show. Megan is one of the finest pro-life apologists you will find anywhere in the country. In fact, of all the people I've been privileged to mentor, she is at the top of the list without question. So I am delighted to have her in studio today to talk about a very important thinker, not because she's brilliant, but because she's having an impact in a negative way on culture, and we need to know how to deal with that. Now, those of you that were with us in our last episode, I talked about Rebecca Todd Peters, and I talked about a post she put up where she wrote, quote, "Abortion is a moral good. Abortion is an act of love. Abortion is an act of grace. And finally, abortion is a blessing." And I mentioned that the primary problem with that post was not that someone who would write that is certainly hell-bent and heading the wrong direction when it comes to eternity. And a lot of listeners said, man, she's just demonic. Okay, perhaps. But the real issue here we need to dial in on, at least out of the gate, is how she assumes the unborn are not human. Would she write something like that if we were talking about killing 5-year-olds? The obvious answer is no. And what happens is a lot of pro-lifers get all worked up about where this person is coming from before they deal with the core of the problem. All of these appeals to abortion being a moral good, being a blessing, being a choice we should trust women with, and yada, 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 all of them assume the unborn aren't human. And if you as a pro-life Christian are not ready to expose that assumption, you're going to get off on the left foot trying to engage people who think like she does. But I wanted to go deeper today and talk to somebody who's actually written a very scholarly article on Rebecca Todd Peters at the Christian Research Journal. And I wanted to bring Megan into this discussion to talk about what is it that this lady is actually arguing in a bigger sphere of things, and how can we as Christians be prepared to address people like that. So welcome, Megan. Great to have you.
It's good to be here.
Tell us, if you would, a little bit about what her primary argument is.
Okay, well, the tricky thing about Rebecca Todd Peters is that she wrote a book in 2018 called Trust Women, a progressive Christian argument for abortion. And she herself is a Presbyterian pastor. And so she is, the tricky thing about her that throws people, I think, is she is calling herself Christian and making these arguments, but her argument is anything but an argument that would fit squarely within the Christian worldview. A few things that she has going on. One, that progressive word. Progressive Christianity can mean many different things. In Rebecca Todd Peters' case, progressive Christianity means she has jettisoned the Bible as anything that we can really count on for something that can inform our lives here and now. In fact, she writes in her book something like, and I paraphrase, this 2,000-year-old text, what does it really have to say for us now? It's good in some ways, but mostly it's kind of outdated. And we need to, as many progressive Christians, go to kind of re-inform these central doctrines to fit our society and the way it is right now. We have progressed beyond it, in other words. To
Yeah,
do
it's like
that,
other progressive pastors I had heard say, the Apostle Paul needs to be updated. This is
right.
a telltale sign of progressive Christianity. You're right. Go on. I
Yeah.
interrupted you.
No, it's okay. There's a couple other features that we can unpack, Scott, because of that faulty foundation. The way that she tends to talk about abortion, number one, is not from the Christian worldview at all. Telltale words in her writing, things like that she is an intersectional feminist, things like oppressed and oppressor, that traditional Christianity is very patriarchal. She uses the word misogynistic often. And so she talks about the oppressed, particularly women in this case, who are oppressed because of this patriarchal view. And so morally, she would frame abortion as something that is up to the individual woman to decide for herself, depending on her circumstances, that she is the one who is best equipped to make that decision for herself. So moral relativism is her moral good that she's talking about when she says abortion is a moral good. Again, these things are not Christian.
No, not at
and they're
all.
dangerous. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, given she appeals to intersectionality and to oppressed categories, that's a very woke worldview she's bringing to this discussion. Do you get from her writing that she's engaging in standpoint epistemology, meaning reducing moral and ethics to the standpoint of the oppressed victim rather than some objective standard?
Yes, yes, that is exactly the way I would put that. You put it beautifully, though it's not a beautiful view, of course. So she does. She talks about the fact she tells her own stories first of all, and so I mean to pause there. Anytime we're doing a training, I just actually got done with a training with students at Summit Ministries in the Summit Gap Year program, and we were interacting with some ideas, not Peters in this case, but two of the questions I asked for them. One was identify the problem with this view. And that's what they were able to do. Two, I said, now how would you address a conversation with her, with that individual, in order to expose the problem? In Rebecca Todd Peters' case, she tells her story. And her story is not an easy one to read. She walked through some difficult things. She had 2 abortions that she unpacks in her book. Both were painful experiences for her, and she talks about the difficulty therein. And so in that, again, we're looking for the ideas, what's going on. She's saying that because her circumstances were difficult, she was the best person to make those decisions. Thus, we get wording like abortion is an act of love, abortion is merciful, or the things that she said in the post that you commented on in the last episode. So to your point.
And of course, the undefended premise there is that if something is painful, there can be no objective morals that will apply to it. It must be only the individual that resolves it.
Yes, and that probably even they're put in that situation because of outside oppressive forces.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think she is appealing to some Christians?
Well, because she claims to be a Christian. Not only that, a Christian or religious leader. She's a pastor. And so for someone who hasn't given a lot of thought to the case for life or this issue at large, or who has maybe not the biblical understanding, who's ready to jettison that as something from the past and accept something new, right? Something that feels good right now or helps people feel better right now. Her teachings are very attractive to people like that.
Contrast, if you would, Megan, her way of resolving the abortion personal decision she made with the model we would see in Scripture with the Christian gospel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd have to dig in a little bit to her understanding of the Bible and a little bit of her understanding of the way abortion goes. So let me go to her words so we don't misrepresent her. She would see the Bible as, again, something that is useful and perhaps good, and we can glean good things from it, but we have progressed past it. She would also make an argument from silence, which your listeners should be very familiar with. In other words, the Bible doesn't say the word abortion. It doesn't really address abortion directly. Therefore, abortion must not be something that the Bible deems wrong. She then goes on to talk about the fact that because abortion is a normal practice, in other words, 1 out of 3 women, according to the statistics, have had an abortion in our nation, that since it is normal, it must therefore be normative. Now, that's not the word she used, but that's the argument she's making. It must be fine. It's a normal thing. So why can't we reshape the ethic to address the way the world is working right now? But then some interesting things start to happen, because our listeners, your listeners, are going, man, I see what Scott's saying. She's assuming a lot about the unborn not being human. She uses the word the prenate. She uses wording like a potential person. So she's assuming all over the place the unborn are not human. Not only that, though, Scott, in an interesting turn in her book, she actually argues that the scientific argument that embryology makes, that life begins at conception, that itself, the scientific viewpoint, is a theological position. And so she dismisses it as reasonable, which is interesting coming from a pastor. So it's a mess, Scott. It's a mess.
So we get from her this idea that the case against abortion can be only framed religiously, but by that she means something subjective, not something that's true with a capital T.
Yes.
In her worldview, religious truth claims don't count as real knowledge like science does, and they certainly don't count as objectively true with a capital T. Instead, we have to punt to the individual. Yeah. I'm curious, if you got coffee with her, which I know you being the gracious soul you are, would take her up on the invitation, though I doubt she'd offer you one. Where would you begin a conversation?
Well, in reading her story and her book, I think that the things that I see that we would have some common ground on are, she recognizes that abortion causes pain. She recognizes that it's difficult for women, something very hard that they walk through. And so she couches her argument in compassion. And I think I can meet her on those grounds. I recognize that abortion causes pain, and I recognize that the conversation is driven by compassion. I'd probably begin by asking her her story, and then asking her those great tactics questions from our mutual friend, Greg Kokel, about what do you mean by certain words? If all I had to go on were the post that was very popular a couple weeks ago that you were mentioning in the last episode, I might start asking about what she means by moral good, what she means by things like love, what she means by grace and blessing. What do those words mean? Because I think it's kind of one of those Inigo Montoya moments, right, from The Princess Bride. It's like, I don't think you mean that means what you think it means kind of thing. Right. But then I would also lean heavily on, I hear you, but have you thought about this? In other words, Scott, gosh, I learned this from the best. I learned it from you. I learned it from great people. When we walk into these conversations because of the gospel, which we take to be objectively true, that enables us to walk into hard situations with our eyes wide open. I can see all of the hardship Rebecca Todd Peters is talking about, and I can hear it, and I can receive it, and I can do that. But I can also stand in the gap of going, I see that all of this is difficult, but you must consider these things because we live in reality.
In other words, the confidence you have in your own Christian-aligned worldview can allow you to just open up and let the person talk without feeling defensive, without feeling like you got to jump in and be hyper sensitive to every syllable they offer. You kind of back away from being on edge, and you can just sit back and let the conversation unfold, which is a sign of confidence. Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. What do you think Christians in particular need to know about the attempt by many today? You know, you think about, I can think of a lot of guys. There's that Senate candidate in Texas, James Tallarico, who's trying to argue the Bible is pro-abortion, pro-choice. There's a lot of people now trying to reach out to Christians and say, guess what? Everything you've been taught is wrong. Actually, here's what the Bible does and doesn't say about homosexuality, about abortion, about marriage. And we see this frontal assault on the people of faith. What do people of faith need to do to inoculate themselves against these kinds of arguments?
Well, the first thing you just addressed is to recognize if Christianity is true, then we live like it's true.
Right.
That informs our posture entirely.
Now,
If
I'm
the
going to
world
stop you right
wants,
there for a moment because there might be some viewers that might go, I'm not sure what you mean when you say Christianity is true. You don't mean it's true for you, Megan. You mean something else. What do you mean?
well, I'm a Christian because I think Christianity, the Christian worldview, is the best explanation of the way the world really is. I'm not a Christian because it's my favorite. It has actually nothing to do with my preferences, though I have come to prefer it. Though the thing that makes it true is the fact that I recognize that the way Christianity describes the world is more thorough, more satisfying, and it only continues to be that more so than any other worldview that's presented.
It
Yeah,
corresponds to reality better than alternative explanations.
that is the
Yeah.
succinct way to put it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think this is so important because we're encountering students at Summit, students in Christian schools, even adults in churches that don't have a firm grasp on what we mean by truth. We are
Mhm.
not saying it's true because we like it. We're not saying it's true because I happen to believe it. We're saying it's true objectively, meaning it's true outside of us. It's true across the board. And
Mhm.
for some people, that strikes them as that's an oppressive statement. That's arrogant. But it's really not
Mm.
arrogant. Can you give us some insight as to why it's not arrogant to say what I believe here is true with a capital T?
Absolutely. Well, we have to understand that there are two types of truths that we operate with in our day-to-day lives. One of them is that subjective kind of truth, which deals with personal preferences. Those are the things that I create. So they depend on me. They're about me. When I make subjective claims, I'm talking about myself. Objective claims, however, are the ones that are about reality. And objective truths, as you pointed out, are those that exist independently of the subject. They're true whether I prefer them or not. They're true whether I'm even aware of them or not.
Right.
They're the things I come to discover. And here's a helpful thing about objective truths that I've learned along the way, Scott. An objective truth is the kind of thing that is not made true because of your believing it. Your belief in it doesn't make it true. It is simply true.
Right.
And contrary to that, your disbelief in an objective truth does not make it untrue. If we were talking about mathematics, that would be pretty clear. 2
Right.
plus 2 equals 4, whether I like numbers or I'm even aware of how to do math or think it's 5.
Right.
So Christianity is true in the latter way, objectively true, which means, now let me back up a little bit. Because of the nature of objective truths, when I make an objective kind of claim, it can be right or wrong, true or false, because it's the kind of thing that I discover. We can come together as individuals and talk about an objective claim, compare it to reality and say, this actually doesn't line up. Here's some evidence as to why not. Or, wow, this hits the mark. Can we both see that? Look. And that's kind of how it works. For that reason, when you make a claim like Christianity is true, because it's the best explanation of the way the world is, you're not being arrogant. Because of the nature of those kinds of claims, you actually submit to the person or people in front of you that you could be wrong about it.
That is such an important point, and I hope all our viewers will take note of that. When we claim that our Christian worldview is true, we're actually being humble because we're presenting our view to an objective standard that all parties can use to weigh the evidence and evaluate our claims. Where
Yes.
the person who thinks everything's subjective, what tends to happen is they want you to believe it just because they believe it. And how dare you challenge them? They're not even open to the challenge. The idea that you would say what you believe is wrong strikes them as inherently a personal attack, which is what you and I have seen for years in the abortion debate.
Mhm.
People get all bent out of shape when you challenge what they believe as if somehow you've attacked them personally, that you're
Yeah.
trying to unravel their character. And a lot of what we have to do in pro life apologetics is teach people the rules of thinking before we can even get our case fully out there on the table.
That's right, Scott. And the fact of the matter is, as you make episode after episode, the pro-life view is true objectively, and we have excellent reasons to believe that it is. In fact, every
Yep.
argument that's been brought against it, that there's not one that we've read. And believe me, you guys, Scott has read all of them he can find. If there's one he doesn't know about, he'll read that too. None of them can overcome the veracity of the pro-life view. That means that even if you don't know all the answers, even if you're not sure about how to word an argument, no matter what, you can be confident that the view you hold is true. And just in that posture of confidence, you present someone who is so countercultural. You're not angry when someone attacks the view because it's not about you. You can ask a good question. You can be curious about them. And just that alone, before even mastering the pro-life argument, is something that makes a difference.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break, folks. When we come back, I'm going to ask Megan to say a little bit about the reality conference that she just spoke at in Dallas and what the organization she's with, Stand to Reason, is doing to help students understand truth with a capital T. I'll see you on the other side. We'll be right back. Hello, friends. You may not have time to read a full-length treatment of abortion like I've done in this book, The Case for Life, the second edition, but you may have time to take what amounts to 7 sessions, a week's worth of study if you want to do it day by day, to learn how to defend your pro-life views persuasively. We have a basic course that will help you do just that. You will learn how to make a formal case for the pro-life position. You will learn how to defend it with science and philosophy. Even with non-Christians, you can make a case for the pro-life view. Then we'll teach you how to handle objections, how to recognize the 5 bad ways people argue about abortion, and how they often bring up things that are beside the point. You'll learn to keep the main thing, so that you're in charge instead of feeling like you're in the hot seat whenever the issue of abortion comes up. Visit the website for details. Welcome back, everyone. We've been talking about Rebecca Todd Peters, an alleged Christian, I use that word advisedly with quotes, who argues in favor of abortion. And just before the break, Megan, we were talking about truth with a capital T, and you said something during the break about Rebecca Todd Peters I think we ought to revisit here, about how she views the Bible, when she uses it, and when she doesn't. Go ahead and elaborate.
Sure. Well, the first thing to pay attention to, as we pointed out earlier, the wording gives her away. She's talking about a worldview that is made up of the oppressed and the oppressors. In this case, traditional Christianity is an oppressor of women. That's actually not a Christian worldview at all, especially since we know that the Bible was incredibly favorable to women, even in those ancient times.
And we know that Christianity as a cultural force liberated women more than anything yet to date in history. In the Roman, Greco-Roman world, women had no rights at all, and they could be used as property and mistreated and abused. And Christianity came along and said, no, listen, ma'am, you have an identity in Christ. You are not based on what your masters are trying to make you out to be. You are a daughter of the King, and Christianity liberated women. I'm starting to preach. I'll shut up.
Oh,
Continue your
yes,
point.
and I'm going to say it louder so the people in the back can hear. Yes, yes, yes. So the worldview that she's actually holding to there is a Marxist worldview. And it's revealed through, although the book was written in 2018, critical theory really kind of came to the forefront during 2020 and 2021. And Scott, you've spoken about that to some measure, but recognize those terms and see not a Christian worldview that she's coming from in her argument for abortion. Secondly, in the entirety of the book, she rarely mentions scripture at all. If she does, it's in a negative way, or she will draw something, a teaching about perhaps love or something like that, kindness, and she'll use that to push her view forward. And throughout the entirety of the book, the thing that she never mentions in her Christian argument for abortion, although it was a progressive Christian argument for abortion, she never mentions the gospel, not a single time, which is the only way that I know how to look at this issue, Scott.
Right.
So the gospel that tells us that we can't condemn anyone as we're making our case for life. But that apart from the work of Christ, we stand on a level playing field before God the Father, so we can step into that space and tell the truth modeled by Christ first,
right,
in the gospel. And we can make a difference for people. We can bring hope and healing and more flourishing than any other view, I guess, promises to bring. But it's just important
yes,
to know.
exactly right. With the gospel, we can tell the truth about abortion and then point people to the only remedy that will work for healing. And that is that Christ was our legal substitute on the cross. He bore the wrath of God in our place. And therefore, those that trust in him alone for salvation are declared righteous because of what Jesus did. And God proved that was sufficient by raising Christ from the dead. So we have strong confidence that we do, in fact, have an objective Savior, not a subjective one where we simply shout our abortion to make ourselves feel better.
Yes.
This is the damning part about the secular worldview. It offers no real diagnosis of the problem and therefore can offer no real solution to fix that problem. And that's the bondage so many Americans find themselves in today. Real quickly, we've got about 2 minutes. You just came from Dallas speaking at the Reality Conference. How many students were there? What is going on with that and your role in it?
If my numbers are correct, there were more than 3,000 students at the Dallas conference this year. It's the biggest one they've ever had in Dallas. We've been having sellout crowds at every location. The Reality Apologetics Conference is a student-geared apologetics conference, though we have people of all ages who attend. And we do that in 6 different cities that stand to reason. Dallas was the first of our spring tour, so we have 2 cities left. One is in Philadelphia, though you might have a hard time getting tickets to that one. That one sold out 4 weeks ago, I think. And the conference isn't for another 2 weeks.
I call that great news.
That is great news. It's kind of startling to all of us going, we need more space because these students are hungry to know how to make a defense. They've had it with the secular worldview. They see their friends walking in non-truths, and they want to be able to step into the gap and help. And many of them are bringing their friends to the conference, so those friends are hearing about Christianity and the truth of the Christian worldview and its ability to speak to hard things for the very first time.
Megan, you are doing phenomenal work. I'm so proud of you and the way the Lord has caused your work to flourish. And everybody watching this right now, if you need somebody to speak at your pregnancy center banquet, school assemblies, your conference to reach youth, maybe a D-Now weekend, who knows, whatever, this young woman here can help you and will deliver a very powerful, true Christian message with a capital T. Megan, I'm proud of you. Thank you for joining us today, and give my love to your husband, Tripp, and I hope to see you out in the road at an upcoming summit conference.
Well, since you're one of my favorite people in the world too, Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, that's a wrap for today. Look forward to seeing you next time on the Case for Life program.